Welcome to another broadcast from mindyourhealthcast.com. As you know, for the last 2 years or so, we have been putting all of these broadcasts on the internet with the intent that maybe here and there someone would glean some valuable information from it. And as you know, it all relates to the health field in some way or the other. And today, we're going to talk for a little while about suppressed and forbidden therapies. Now, you may think that that's ridiculous if you're not well informed in the natural health field and say, boy, yeah, that's so silly. If anything was going to help, all the doctors would be doing it. Baloney, not so. As you're going to find out as you start looking for yourself. Now remember, as I've said over and over and over, I'm here to provoke you to start digging on your own and finding out for yourself. You don't have to agree with me, and I'm not trying to convince you of anything more than to open your eyes and start looking on your own. Now, I have been, of course, around a few years, and many of the things that I talk about, I was alive when those happened. And I know that they're true, and in most cases I've known the people either personally or casually. And I know what happens. I myself experienced a lot of harassment to get out of the field several years ago because of the fact that I had become known as probably the top practitioner of natural health in Florida, doing especially what I do is energetic medicine, and found out my name was being circulated in the newsletter of the local American Medical Association, and at some point they attempted to wipe me out, period, as far as being able to treat anyone, and also they had in mind having me put in prison. Now that's happened on many occasions, and before this is through, we'll mention some of the things that have happened to practitioners who dared to get people well utilizing therapies that MDs and Big Pharma doesn't provide, nor do they want it provided, in as much as it could be very inexpensive, but at the same time very effective. Now, before we get started into this heavily, there is a website that would be to your advantage if you're interested, that can give you a lot of information and direct you in a lot of directions. Now, I don't say you have to take what they say as the absolute truth, but it is a tremendous resource to get you to other places. There's a lot of material, and of course one of the best things that's ever happened, as far as I'm concerned, for the average person, is the internet, which gives you the accessibility to information beyond what anyone probably could have ever gotten to in their lifetime. I know that for a fact because I have been studying and researching for years, and once the internet opened up, it became a tremendous resource, and in a matter of minutes and sometimes seconds, I can have access to information that might have taken me years to get to, if ever. And as I say, you're going to find some opposing viewpoints. And so ultimately, then it's going to be up to you to use your head and your logic and your thinking to determine for yourself what's best for you. So when I present this material, if I say I believe that to be true, that means that I have probably researched it for years and years. But nonetheless, we don't expect you to just accept it because I said it, but I want it to be a provocation to you to cause you to go out and look for yourself. Now, it's interesting because this whole concept of suppression and repression and forbidden and so forth isn't anything new. It goes back for centuries. I have studied the history of health and medicine for many centuries back, both on the physical side and the psychological side, and controversies of those who are in power and have the money repressing any opposing views is nothing new. And with the health field, it's especially true because, as you realize by now, when a nation spends $2.7 trillion in a year on therapies of various sorts and diagnostics, then we're talking about a lot of money that's at stake. And if you have an industry that each person that comes into that for therapy and diagnosis, etc., brings in approximately $1 million before they are dead, then you can imagine what we're talking about. We're not talking about pennies. And you know, it's interesting in modern times, now this I'm talking about the last several years, when people were going and making use of a few minor natural things, it was only amounted in a year to a few $1 million, which is pocket change to the pharmaceutical industry. They weren't really too worried about it, and they were able to kind of keep it in check. Now, as we are going to be talking about 4 different categories of natural therapies, and probably will not get finished in today's episode, so to speak, we'll probably have to finish it in the next broadcast. But nonetheless, the first one we will be talking about will be nutrition. And so I still remember hearing it over and over as some of the health food stores were opening and people were starting to take vitamins and supplements of various sorts, that the pharmaceutical industry was constantly pumping out the idea, you're wasting your money. You don't need to take those things. And in some cases you might overtake them and it could be dangerous. And I have to throw in that dangerous thing because several years ago, there was a publication by the U.S. Government Printing Office, which is interesting. And the publication was called The Dangers of Vitamin and Mineral Supplements. And in that booklet, they make the comment that every year, thousands of people are hospitalized and many, many people die from overtaking vitamins. Now, that statement was printed in that brochure. Now, Dr. Harold Manners, who was a PhD, taught biology and research at Loyola University in Illinois, read this booklet and took exception to it because he not only was a professor of biology and knew all about biochemistry and so forth, but he later developed some very powerful therapies relating to cancer and other degenerative illnesses. And I knew him pretty well personally. Anyhow, he took exception to that, and he contacted the U.S. Government Printing Office and said, I would like you to provide to me a list of those people who either were hospitalized or died taking vitamin supplements. And the response from the person he talked to was, well, obviously that's an error. And he said, well, then you should be retracting. They said, well, it's too late. We've published the booklet and it's out now, so there's really not anything we can do about it. And so he recognized very rapidly the futility of trying to deal with this type of power and intent. But anyhow, he went on to do several things, and I met him relating to the cancer therapies and so forth that he had worked out protocols for. But he became one of those fatalities, in a sense, for the type of therapy he did. And so eventually he had to depart from the United States and went to Mexico and opened a clinic to be able to utilize his therapies, even though they were all natural in nature. They were vitamins and minerals and amino acids, etc., and enzymes. And so it worked very well, and eventually he kind of dropped dead of a cardiac arrest. And my suspicion is, knowing how he was hounded, and of course he had to leave the university and so forth, because of the fact that it was interesting, in Chicago, he found a hospital that was willing to utilize his therapy for cancer. It was non-toxic and it was relatively inexpensive compared to any of the chemotherapies, radiation, or other methodologies, the surgeries that are used. And it wasn't very long before the AMA and the FDA and so forth came down on him like crazy, and the hospital, and so they had to decline utilizing his therapy anymore. And that's what forced him to go down to Mexico and open a clinic. But I really think that the stress of all of that caused him to destroy his heart. And, you know, if a guy was working as a professor in the university for years and at some point would be able to retire from the university and would be able to write books, which he did write at least one book that I know of, and maybe more, about what he did, and I know he put out a lot of research papers about it, and then suddenly have to leave all of that because he's helping people get well inexpensively. Now that theme is going to keep popping up over and over and over. Watch for yourself. You don't have to pay attention to me, but just watch for yourself. If something comes out that you hear about that is very inexpensive, that will help someone with a serious so-called degenerative illness, in short order, the AMA and the FDA and all of the big dignitaries who supposedly are the authorities will jump right in and start poo-pooing it, and before it's all done, then the public thinks, oh well, it probably wasn't anything anyhow because it's not real medicine, and it's gone. You don't hear any more about it. And so I've watched this happen over the years, and of course with the vitamins, the drug companies, and this is the hypocrisy of the drug companies. They came out and would tell people, oh, you're just throwing your money away taking vitamins, you don't need the vitamins, you're just buying expensive urine, they're not going to do anything. You know, if you need help, you need real medicine, so that's what you need to get. And don't throw your money away on these supplements because they're worthless. Now, they said that for years, and as I say, people were spending a few $1 million on them, so there was no big threat. You know, they could take that out of the petty cash on any day and think nothing of it. However, as time went on and Oriental medicine and the chiropractic profession beat them in court, showing how they deliberately suppressed their profession, and other things started happening, there was more and more of a change occurring. And of course, on top of it, the modern medicine on its scientific basis was not getting people well. And all you have to do is look around and ask yourself one simple question: are we healthier today than before? And are there less chronic illnesses today than before? And of course the answer is no. So something isn't working by taking all of this expensive $2.7 trillion worth of diagnostics and drugs. So at any rate, what became a problem was when people, in spite of them telling them they were wasting their money, and in spite of poo-pooing taking supplements and vitamins, guess what happened? One day they realized it was no longer in the millions, it was now in the billions. Now, when it starts to getting in the billions, which, you know, is 1,000 million, that's a lot of money. And that's no longer coming out of petty cash, that's coming out of the main ledger sheet, you know, the big profit and loss. And so, guess what they did? If they couldn't scare people or poo-poo them into not taking, they decided to join in and make money on it themselves. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, and I remember when it happened, you started seeing ads by the pharmaceuticals, and they were implying, well, of course, everybody knows you should take vitamins. And so they started making a very, what I think is a very, and now this is my opinion, a very poor quality supplement made out of synthetic vitamins, which costs them very little, and they charge a big buck for, but they jumped on the bandwagon and started cashing in on the vitamin market. And it's interesting, even the herb market, which they poo-pooed for years, now all of a sudden they've jumped in and make herbs available, and even put out a PDR on herbal medicine, which of course they said before there's no evidence that it has any value, and there's no evidence that it's even safe to take those things. But now all of a sudden they cough up a PDR by the same company that makes the regular drug PDR, and a PDR on nutritional medicine. Isn't it interesting how it depends on what the profit picture is, whether they're interested in selling it or not? So they did. They jumped in and have provided all these supplements, and they do these major ads on TV, and you know when you spend a few million for an ad, you're making a lot of money off of it. So I've come to the conclusion that the pharmaceutical industry as a whole does not really care what you take. Contrary to what most people think, they're not in business to help people. They're in business to make money. And if you go back and track the history of the pharmaceutical industry, you'll get a good idea as to how important that profit picture is. So at any rate, they are willing to cash in and sell it to you if it's profitable. And of course, the way they make the vitamins, they use, I think, as I say, a very inferior synthetic form of vitamins, and try to convince people that synthetics are the same as natural vitamins, which are, in my mind, is in no way true, both in terms of response and if you do testing. There are ways of doing testing about the energetic quality of supplements, and even some of them can be toxic, like their synthetic vitamin A. It takes a very minimal dose of that to become toxic to the liver, whereas natural vitamin A and its natural combination, we have given huge doses of it with no adverse effects. But theirs does actually damage the liver if you take a very large dose. And they will warn you. I mean, they know that that happens, and they'll warn you. But of course, they keep telling the public, vitamin A is vitamin A. It makes no difference. But that's not true. I don't believe that, and I think if you start digging on your own and you start searching, you will find that that is also not true. Now see, this battle, however, as I've studied more and more of history, this battle is nothing new. If you go back historically 300 years, you'll find that there has been ongoing suppression of one group getting in charge and trying to keep any competition out. And so we've talked about some pieces of this information along the way, and it's true. I just recently went back 200 years looking at health and looking at the medical profession, and we've had this ongoing battle that's been happening. And one of the big splits, of course, has been the allopathic versus the homeopathic. Now, most of you probably at least have heard the word homeopathy or homeopathic medicine by now. Whether you know much about it, I'm sure you've heard it. Well, anyhow, there's an interesting historian by the name of Harris Coulter, who I, again, know personally, who has written a series of books called The Divided Legacy. And he goes back and traces from the time of Samuel Hahnemann, who was a medical doctor in Europe. He was German in origin, and when he realized what medicine of the day was doing to people, he decided not to work in the field of medicine because he could not utilize, in his mind, the stuff that they were doing. He couldn't do that to people. So he ended up making his living, as he was proficient in several languages, he made his living translating medical books into various languages. And at any rate, he, at some point, reading a book that he was translating having to do with drug action, got him thinking and started him off on a different path, and out of that he developed the concept of homeopathic medicine. Two of the big concepts of it that were revolutionary was the simillimum, meaning you pick the treatment based on the symptoms of the person, but you didn't treat the symptoms. What you did, that was the indicator or the roadmap to the right substance that was going to benefit. And the second big thing was not only the subminimum, but the minimum effective dose. So instead of doing like medicine was doing, which was going to higher and higher concentrations, he went to lower and lower concentrations, getting to that minimum effective dose. And he standardized how to prepare these substances, which basically came from herbs and or mineral compounds. There was some other variations in that, but those were the primaries at the beginning, were either from herbs or from mineral substances. And he started a whole new revolution. This was actually his first major paper was published in 1795, outlining it as a scientific system, which it is. And when I say scientific, it means it's repeatable. It hasn't changed. It works the same today as it did back in 1795 or throughout the 1800s or throughout the 1900s. It still worked the same, and if you follow the same procedure, you get the same results. Now, it's interesting because medicine claims how scientific they are, but if you subscribe to a pharmacological digest of the drugs on the market, you will find, first of all, there's approximately 15,000 to 18,000 drugs circulating on the market at any given time. You will also find that once every month, several hundred pages come through of drugs that are being removed because of problems. Either they don't do what they're supposed to at all, or they're dangerous, and being replaced by other drugs, so that at any given time you have that constant flux. Now, if it were scientific, as they claim, we wouldn't see that happening. The same materia medica that was used by homeopaths in 1825 is still the same materia medica today. And the homeopathics work the same way, and they don't poison people. They actually aid the body in getting well on its own. And so it's interesting that this battle ensued between these two thoughts, or schools of thought, on medicine, and persisted down through the years up until the present time. Now, during the early 1900s, medicine thought they had finally wiped it out. They put on a major campaign to discourage the public, and they ridiculed it and said it just couldn't possibly work. And there were a few quirky things happened that made people think that medicine was going to be able to provide the magic for everything, and even led the U.S. Surgeon General in 1968 to stand before the U.S. government joint Congress and declare, gentlemen, you can close the books on infectious disease. That was 1968. His name was Seward. Of course, that was a major understatement because now things are worse than ever. But he thought and was so confident at that point that they had it all under control and that no one would have to worry again, which of course is not true. If you pay any attention to the news or the print that's out today, you will know that that's not the case. It is not a scientific system. I know scientific methodology, and if you look, you will see how things get skewed, how they get misinterpreted on purpose. I mean, there's a whole approach to understanding scientific methodology. So in any case, one of the major issues that started to developing, and so I've divided this into nutrition and into herbs and to electromagnetic therapies and to energetic medicine, 4 different categories of places that things have been suppressed. And I've watched it happen myself in this country, and I've known many of the individuals that were involved. Many of them ultimately were forced out of this country to go to some other country or to Mexico to be able to carry on the therapies that they developed because they were driven out in this country. And on one occasion, William Kelly, who was a dentist, and he was actually trained in research and biology, and so he was working as a researcher in cancer. And one day he suddenly realized that he had all the symptoms of cancer, and it ended up he had pancreatic cancer. And of course he jumped right in for therapy from medicine, And at some point, they finally told him one day, well, you have about a week left to live. Now, Dr. Kelly wasn't real happy about that. And so he said, I guess I've got to take my health in my own hands. What a marvelous idea. And so he started looking, and he put together for himself a nutritional program and a body cleansing program and enzymes and a few natural herbs, but primarily a nutritional shift. And guess what? He didn't die in a week. In fact, he didn't die of cancer at all. And he recovered, and he was so excited about it, he thought, wow, I bet a lot of people would like to know about this. And of course, it didn't cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars like it would if he went through the traditional therapy. He already had done that and spent all that. But for what actually got him well, it didn't cost that much. So at any rate, he actually had people who know him come to him and say, well, gee, either I have cancer or one of my family or my friends have cancer. Would you work up a program for them? And of course he said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. And so he started getting busier and busier, working at programs. So he put out a book, and it was called One Cure for Cancer. He didn't say that it was the cure-all, but he said it is one possibility. And the reason he said that, he used his own case as an example and told what happened to himself. You know, the medical people became so angry about his book that they were able to get the Federal Trade Commission to get an injunction to stop him from selling the book. They did not want the public to read that book. And they were successful. They stopped the publication of it, and they stopped the circulation of it. It was illegal to sell the book. And so they continued to harass him until finally he left the country and moved to Mexico as usual. That seems to be the case for a lot of these people who were doing some of the good natural therapies. They ended up having to depart out of the U.S. into Mexico, and were able to carry on their therapies there, which still is in operation today. I mean, there's several clinics that do the same thing. And as we get along, we'll talk about some of the other people. I already told you that Dr. Manners, who was using nutritional therapy, had to relocate and give up his professorship at the university, and etc., because, he was a nasty, awful person. He was actually helping people get well for a whole lot less money, and it wasn't damaging to their body. Guess what? They actually not only got well, but they stayed well if they took care of themselves and cleaned up their lifestyle. So in any case, Kelly was wiped out. And so that was one of the people I was going to talk about. And there's a whole list of them. I don't know how many we can get to, but we want to talk just about them for a minute on this whole idea of the philosophy. You see, there's this divided legacy that Dr. Harris Coulter talks about in these books. He traces how the two different viewpoints determine the therapy. Now, the allopath, I mentioned allopath before. Many people have never heard of it. The word allopath means opposite illness, and bottom line, it means if you have a fever, they're going to give you a chemical that turns off the fever. In other words, they're treating you with an opposite. But it's more than that, because every substance that you put in your body that has a suppressive nature is also going to create other problems. Now, in order to make that more palatable, what happened is they came up with the term side effects. And so side effects means that, it's just there's a little aggravation on the side, but don't worry about that. You're going to get rid of your fever. And what they don't tell you is, of course, in order to get rid of the fever, you have to shut down pathways in the body that are part of immune function. So when you turn off the fever, guess what you do? You impair the immune system, because the body creates a fever as a part of immune response to get rid of a problem. So yes, it's true. You feel better, but are you better? That's always the question, is are you better? So allopath means to treat with an opposite. In actual fact, you generate a new drug-induced disease, because that's what the adverse effects are. The side effects are a disease of a sort that has been implanted into your body by the drug, because it interferes with functions in the body. And no drug does not have adverse effects of some sort. Some very deadly to some people, and some more minimal. But in any case, you pay a price when you do an allopathic treatment. Now, way back, they did bloodletting, and they did purges, and they did a lot of some pretty nasty things in the name of allopathic medicine, which is why Dr. Hahnemann turned away from it and ultimately developed homeopathic medicine. So, on top of it, there's a deeper part of that philosophy which has this to say, that since Newton, we believe that the universe is clockwork. Everything is mechanical in nature, and so human beings are kind of riding on this planet, but they're independent beings, but they're mechanical in nature. So that means that if you have a bad organ problem, if you cannot turn off the symptoms with a drug, you just may have to cut the organ out. And so that is done a lot. And it's called the materialistic reductionist idea or philosophy or concept. That means we see man as nothing but a machine. And therefore we can manipulate the parts, we can manipulate the function, we can exchange parts by doing transplants, and it doesn't make any difference. And in many cases we just cut them out anyhow, because as long as you can live without them, then you don't need them anyhow. Now, the homeopath on the other side were referred to as vitalists. Those are the people that consider that the body has this energetic side, this life force, and that the life force always is working to keep you going and being healthy, but things can get in your body that interfere with that life force, and so sometimes it needs a jump start, like a jumper of your car in a very cold winter, and the battery is really drained down. It sometimes needs a jumper. And so what are you doing? Are you going to chop out the engine because it doesn't run, or are you going to give the body a jump to help it correct itself? So the homeopath means to be treated with a like, something that if you took a lot of it could bring on a set of symptoms like allopathic, but then a very minimal dose of it, a very microdose of it, could aid your body in getting rid of the problem. So this big philosophical split was there between vitalists and between the materialists. And so medicine still today functions out of the materialistic side. They still are doing mechanical work on the body instead of figuring out how to correct it or help it correct itself. They just start cutting, drugging, and removing and replacing or whatever. And of course it works very well because it brings in a pile of money. All those procedures are extremely expensive. And so medicine went from a healing art to a major business. And so that's part of the problem. So anybody who comes along with any kind of therapy that's going to cause people to exit from the big money therapies and diagnostics and get them well and teach them how to stay well, you know, that represents an infringement on your market. And you don't want to lose that market, especially if each person brings in $1 million. You don't want to lose that. So consequently, that's where the big problem has come. And so, unfortunately, I'm noticing that we're also running out of time. So I guess it is going to be a 2-broadcast study. I don't know if it'll get to 3, but maybe a 2. Especially since we've cut the time format back, we're trying to keep it easier on a given session that people don't have to spend a lot of time. An hour got to be pretty long, or over an hour for most people. So, this is going to give you a good introduction, and in the meantime, before the next broadcast, as I say, you may want to go to this website called Educate Yourself, educate-yourself.org and get some very, very good information on all kinds of things related to just what we're talking about. I'm just going to throw this in real fast. This is just a section on the forbidden cures that they have. And it starts out by saying there are a number of alternative healing therapies that work so well and cost so little compared to conventional treatment that organized medicine, the Food and Drug Administration, and their overlords in the pharmaceutical industry, the big three, would rather the public not know about them. The reason is obvious. Alternative non-toxic therapies represent a potential loss of billions of dollars to allopathic medicine and drug companies. The big three have collectively engaged in a medical conspiracy for the better part of 70 years to influence legislative bodies on both the state and federal level to create regulations that promote the use of drug medicine while simultaneously creating restrictive controlling mechanisms. Licensing, government approval, etc., designed to limit and to stifle the availability of non-drug alternative modalities. The conspiracy to limit and to eliminate competition from non-drug therapies began with the Flexner Report in 1910. Now, we'll talk about that a little more on the next broadcast about this Flexner Report and the implications of it and why it was set in motion to begin with. Anyhow, I hope you do get started looking. They've got a lot of information there and a lot of resources, a lot of places you can go to get more information. And as I said, don't take my word for it. Go search it out for yourself. So in the meantime, be healthy, and we look forward to talking with you next week. Remember, go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com. Look through it. We keep adding new information, new pages, and new things that I feel that after years of being in the natural health field that have benefit. And we look forward to seeing you next time.